the recording to say that there it is. So you can go away if you really don't want to be recorded. Hopefully you won't mind.
Councillor Jonathan Owen, leader of East Riding of York.
Sorry.
That's all right. We all need to know that the leader of the council is here. It's very important.
It's not here, it's on YouTube. Sorry.
There's still people coming in, but I am going to make a start because we've got a lot to get through in quite a short amount of time. And if people just miss my introduction bit, it's not the end of the world, it's the bit that comes afterwards that's more important. So here come the slides. Start. There we go. So hopefully everyone now can see our title slide. And hopefully you are all here to hear about East Riding of Yorkshire Council's approach to Multiply and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So I'm just going to start by just kind of running through what we're going to cover today and what's going to happen. And then I'm going to pass over to two of my colleagues. Well, Suzanne first, who's going to talk about Multiply, and then I'll come back in for a little bit of an overview of the Shared Prosperity Fund. Then Suzanne and Helena will talk in more detail about the 3 priority areas. Then we'll look at kind of how that fits in an East Riding context, and look at the next steps, some of which are very speedy. So because the Multiply investment plan has to be submitted by the end of June. If people have project ideas they want to share with us for that, there is a very quick turnaround of needing those back to us by the 9th of June. That's not an application, it's just kind of a project idea submission. We'll talk about it more in more detail. For the Shared Prosperity Fund, you get an extra week, so they need to be in by the 16th of June. So there are some quick actions that we need people to take if they are interested in participating in the investment plan planning part of this process, which I expect you are because you're here today. And then there will be further opportunities through kind of commissioning and grant applications for people to get involved in terms of actually wanting to deliver activity slightly later in the year once the investment planning is done. So that's what we're going to do today. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Suzanne to take us through the Multiply programme, which is a kind of top sliced element of the Shared Prosperity Fund that has to be spent on numeracy activity over the next 3 years. So over to Suzanne.
Good morning, everyone. So just going to give you a very brief overview of Multiply and what it's about. So it's the first priority of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Its aim is to improve adults' numeracy skills, and that's for those people aged 19 plus. And it supports the overall levelling up mission from the Levelling Up White Paper to ensure that by 2030, the number of people successfully completing high quality skills training will have significantly increased. In terms of who actually can utilise the courses that are going to be put on through Multiply, it is for all adults who currently do not have a GCSE grade C or 4 or an equivalent qualification, in essence, a level 2 qualification in maths. Anybody who doesn't have that qualification will be able to access free flexible courses that fit around their lives. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the allocation that the East Riding has. It's split across 4 years. The first year is slightly lower, and that's in recognition of the fact that delivery won't have been able to start as of the 1st of April, because obviously at the moment we've still got to develop the investment plan and submit it to government for them to actually sign it off. Years 2 and 3 have exactly the same amount of allocation spread across those years. So government have sort of split the delivery of Multiply into 3 main delivery strands. So the first one is very much the local approach. So that's what we want to do locally in terms of delivering bespoke adult numeracy programs. And there is a list of interventions which I'll come on to on the next slide that we can choose from in terms of what we want to do. And how we choose those will very much be based on the evidence of the barriers that we have locally to adult learning. Secondly, government are going to launch a new national online programme that offers free digital training. The important thing to note about this is actually that is going to be available to anyone, regardless of existing qualifications. So if you're someone that already has a qualification at GCSE grade 4 or above, there will be some content on there that might be really useful, really helpful if you're wanting to refresh your existing skills. And again, that's something that, because it's digitally available and it'll be there 24/7, you can use that at your own pace and wherever you want. You know, you don't have to necessarily come into a centre to use it. You could do it at home, you could go into a library. So the idea being that it should hopefully be very flexible for people to access other learning opportunities. And the third element, obviously, is to actually the monitoring, how government are going to be able to evaluate the success of the Multiply programme. Obviously, an obvious one is looking at an increased participation in numeracy courses and how many more adults are going to be able to achieve a maths qualification. Similarly, they'll also be looking at improved labour market outcomes. So looking at the amount of adults that are then able to progress into sustained employment or into further education. And then also just looking at the overall impact of the programme. So it's a bit more than just looking at stats around certificates and qualification. It's trying to look at what the perceived and the actual difference in taking part in the programme means to the learners themselves. So in terms of interventions, government have actually come up with a list of 10 interventions that are split across 3 broad objectives. So the first one is very much around improving functional math skills. So this is very much about building the confidence of people who you know, just struggle at the moment to relate to anything that's numerous related or maths related. And they could be things like courses to help people using numeracy to manage their money, which obviously in the current climate is something that's really, really important. And those courses are also intended to be flexible and intensive, that will ultimately lead individuals to get a functional skills qualification. The second objective is focused more around employment outcomes. So it's looking at working with local employers to see whether there's some specific numeracy skills that are required or could be delivered in the workplace. Also courses aimed at adults who can't apply for certain jobs because of their lack of numeracy skills, or people who want to upskill their current numeracy levels, which would enable them to progress further, you know, in their employment. And then finally, there's an element where you can look to target key cohorts. So in that sense, government are looking at parents who might want to increase their numeracy skills to help their children at school, people who have recently left the care system, trying to engage those people at the hardest to reach learners, and also some courses aimed at prisoners, most specifically perhaps those that have been recently released from prison or on temporary or on a temporary licence. So Claire's mentioned the investment plan. As she said, that needs to be submitted to government by the 30th of June. These are the sort of 5 areas that government are looking for information on in terms of the content of the investment plan. Obviously, a really important element of that is the ability for us to deliver the programme. So a key part of that, of course, is going to be partnership working, and where we obviously are really keen to work with local education providers, our voluntary and community sector, Job Centre Plus, where we can look at projects that either can be delivered together or through a procurement process after government have signed off the investment plan, and we're able to procure some of that work out to actually be delivered by other partners at the local level. One of the key things, obviously, that we've got to be able to show as well is the evidence of need and demand. So what data we have at a local level on adult numeracy levels, that we've got a clear understanding of the current provision that we support, and also why improving adult functional numeracy really matters to us locally. The interventions have just been on the slide that I previously showed you. So we need to explain which of those interventions we want to deliver. We do not have to deliver on all 10. We can just choose the ones that are most relevant to us and where we have local evidence that shows as to why they're the most important. And in terms of the interventions, we can deliver more than one provision of learning per intervention. So just if we choose, say, 8 out of 10 of the interventions, on some of those, we could have 4 or 5 different areas of provision against one intervention. Strategic fit, we need to show how the Multiply programme will link to the Levelling Up and the Skills for Jobs white papers, also where it fits locally in terms of strategic fit to existing skills plans, and as we'll come on to a bit later, where it will coordinate with the wider UK Shared Prosperity Fund and some of the activities that we'll be looking to deliver there. And finally, another obviously important element is how we would be proposing to engage and motivate learners. So how we're going to raise awareness of the programme, how we might identify and engage with local employers, and also progression routes for learners through information, advice and guidance. Just to give a little snapshot of the local picture and the type that we're looking at, this is just a map. It's from the Index of Multiple Deprivation. It's just showing educational deprivation across the East Riding. And this is looking at actually a subdomain of the educational deprivation, which is adult skills. So that's the levels of qualification for people aged 25 and above. So as you can see, on the map, the areas where we probably would expect to see the most deprivation along our coastal strip, around Goole, and then we've got little pockets that we're well aware of that got around Driffield, in Beverley, and in some of our more urban areas. So these are the type of statistics that we need to going to be able to reference in the investment plan. Quite a lot of the stuff from the IMD is taken from census data. Obviously, we are due to have the first release of the new census data from 2021 in the middle or towards the end of June. So more of that data as it starts to be released will be really helpful in terms of informing the investment plan moving forwards. It probably will not be readily available for us to put it in at sort of the first iteration of the plan going in, but we will be able to use more of that data as we start to deliver the programme and we review it on an annual basis. So just to provide a bit of a summary of the key points, Multiply is a revenue funding only scheme, so there is no capital funding allocated to it. As I've already said, it's targeting learners aged 19 and over who have not previously gained a GCSE grade 4 or grade C or higher maths qualifications. The interventions that we're looking to deliver should not displace, replace or duplicate any existing adult numeracy provision. So for example, the activity that's currently funded through the existing adult education budget statutory entitlement. There's also an option if we think that there is a need locally for a different intervention that isn't covered under the 10 that the government have provided of a drop-down list, and we can suggest that. But what we will need to do is provide a strong rationale and evidence as to why we want to do it. We will need to capture individual learning data and also further information from learners and teachers and providers, and that all links to the government's overall monitoring and evaluation of the programme. And it's also important to point out that any underspend, so any money we do not spend for this year's allocation, we cannot carry forward into the following delivery year. So if we don't spend it, we do lose it. There's also a couple of key points, some clarification from government on. One of those is to whether all the delivery that we might want to propose through the Multiply programme will be subject to Ofsted, and that's really quite key from our perspective. And in the webinars that we've sat in you know, which have covered the whole of the northeast of England. That's been something that people are really do need some further information on, because obviously if learning's being delivered to an Ofsted level, then it'll impact the way in which those courses have to be developed and actually taught. And we're also still waiting for some confirmation in terms of the level of data that will be needed to be captured in individual learning plans. So just a brief summary of the timelines. As Claire said, obviously it's a really tight deadline to get the multiplier investment plan back to government by the 30th of June, which is why we have set the 9th of June for submission of the project ideas form that we'll pick up a bit later on in the presentation. There's a link on the slides. We will circulate the slides later on this afternoon to everyone. It takes you to our FlexiGrant system. If it's a system you've not used before with us, you will need to briefly register some contact details, but then it'll take you to the form, a series of questions, asking you to give some details about project idea, you know, your project idea, what you think would be really useful to be delivered in the East Riding, why you know that there's a need for it. And then what we plan to do as soon as they are in is obviously to review them, and then to continue discussions with interested stakeholders so that we can inform the development plan. Once the investment plan's been submitted, government have given themselves a couple of months to actually do some quality assurance of those plans. Have reassured us that it is very much an iterative process, that if there's something they feel there's more information on, they will come back and ask us for that additional information. The whole aim is to make sure that those plans are signed off. It is not a process of submitting the plans, them not liking it and saying that's it, sorry, you're not going to get any money. It is definitely a process of working with us to get the plans to the point that they are happy with. Key for us will be to be able to identify what we definitely can deliver this year, given the fact that delivery will start a bit later on. So we need to ensure, you know, that we're quite certain that we're going to be able to spend the money that we've been allocated for this year. Again, there is quite a bit of flexibility in reviewing the plans at key stages during the whole 3-year cycle, where they can be reviewed and updated and amendments made depending upon the success of what it is we're delivering, or if there are changes in local circumstances. And I'm just going to head back over to Claire now.
Thank you very much. So we're now going to move on to the main UK Shared Prosperity Fund overview and a bit more detail about the different priority areas. So in terms of an overview, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is a central pillar of the Levelling Up agenda. So if you're in need of insomnia assistance, you can go and read the whole Levelling Up white paper and see how this fits within the government's kind of Levelling Up agenda. Primary goals to build pride in place. Place has come back into government kind of discussions in a way that it really hasn't been for quite a long time. So talk about kind of regeneration and place-based activity and community are back, and that's really welcomed, I think. We have this predetermined allocation of funds. So over the 3 years that we know about now, we have 1.2 million this year, and that allocation started from April. So the clock's ticking down to get that spent. We have 2.5 million next year and 6.6 million in 2024-25. We do know that the intention is that the Shared Prosperity Fund runs for at least another 3 years after this 3, and we're expecting in the spending review in 2024 that we'll get the allocations for the next 3 years. So this is a kind of longish term programme building up momentum through these 3 years. The promise is that by the end of the next 3 years, we will have had as much funding as we would have had we still been getting European structural investment funds through this period. And if that's true, the next period should be significantly more than now. So we'd be needing to get about £15 million a year in the second 3 years to actually get up to that level of funding. We'll see what happens, but potentially this is a large fund that lasts for 6 years at least. So when thinking about project ideas, obviously we do need things that we'll spend now and can spend now, but also if it's things that need a bit of time to get going and to do feasibility now and design in order to deliver a bit later in the programme, we're interested in those too. So that's quite important. The fundamental aims: boost productivity, pay, jobs and living standards by growing the private sector, spread opportunities and improve public services, and restore a sense of community, local pride and belonging, and to empower local leaders and communities. And part of that is the way that the funding is allocated down to local authority level at this stage. Can I have the next slide? So there are 3 key investment priorities. One very important thing to note, the third one being people and skills. The main allocation for skills doesn't kick in until 24-25. So the third year of this programme. There's a couple of possibilities of doing people and skills activity, particularly where the voluntary sector has been delivering European social funded activity. So community-led local development areas and building better opportunities programmes. There is the possibility to kind of continue on those as they stop. But most of it won't start till 24-25, so that's really important. The other 2, community in place and supporting local business. So I'm going to pass on now to Helena, who's going to talk in more detail about the community and place element of the programme. Helena.
Thank you, Claire. So the community in place element, again, if you want to add to your insomnia, you can read the full Levelling Up paper, but basically the lofty ambitions of Mission 9, which is, as Claire says, about restoring pride in place, such as people's satisfaction with their town centre and engagement with local culture and community. They want this to have risen in the UK and the gap between the top performing and other areas closing by 2030. The other Mission 8 is around well-being and ensuring that every area in the UK we will have closed the gap between the lesser performing areas and the top performing areas. And Mission 11, which is around serious crime and neighbourhood crime. So, interventions that will help crime fall in the worst affected areas. So the investment priority, they talk about the objectives being strengthening social fabric and fostering a sense of pride and belonging through investment in activities which enhance physical, cultural and social ties and access to amenities. So community infrastructure and looking at local community-led projects. Also looking at building resilient, healthy and safe neighbourhoods through investment in quality places where people want to live, work and play. So this priority is going to be largely delivered through the local growth team. For the last 18 months, we have been engaging with stakeholders and businesses in all the main areas of the East Riding to identify community need and to produce action plans, which will now demonstrate the consultation and engagement element that we need for the investment plan. And through that, we've designed a range of interventions that will improve pride of place and encourage town centres to develop into community spaces that are not just about shopping, but are about culture, leisure, improving dwell time, improving things like the nighttime economy. So this strand will be mainly a mixture of grant funding, us commissioning external expertise where required, and in-house provision if necessary. So the local team is going to continue this work and to develop the ambition, and we'll be able to deliver the interventions that we've been identifying over the last 18 months. So this will include things like funding town centre officers or market officers, the development and promotion of wider campaigns to encourage people into individual towns, creating new outdoor or specialist markets, improving town centre signage and wayfinding, delivery of cultural events to increase footfall, shopfront improvements, including things like awnings and signage, improving accessibility for disabled residents and visitors, which is good news because people will remember the days of DDA compliance when there was lots of money around to do adaptations for disability, but that kind of funding disappeared. So the focus is back on this. Funding to encourage landlords to improve exteriors of properties, including first and second floors, targeting empty properties on high street so that we can do something about that, which we've long fought to try and solve and haven't been able to. Town centre greening and tree planting, improving car parks and accessibility, creating pedestrian areas for eating, sitting, dwelling, meeting friends, that sort of thing. Community cleanup activities, funding equipment to target issues such as graffiti, chewing gum, all of these sort of things, which, you know, seem quite unimportant, but actually they're issues that really affect town centres, and we've not been able to tackle those sort of issues. Improvements to protect buildings against flooding, design and management of the environment so that we can look at designing out crime, improving street lighting, CCT improvements, which is good news for a lot of people, promotion of the early and the evening economy, and trying to find ways of making that sort of activity safer and accessible for not just, you know, residents but families as well. Creation of community spaces and assets in town centres, town centre Wi-Fi installation, and footfall counters. So some of this we've already started delivering, and the good news for those that we've been engaging with means that this is the sort of activity we're going to be able to continue. Those of you that are as long in the tooth as me will recognise some of this as Safer Stronger Communities type activity from the late 90s. So again, we're going round the cycle, but it's great news because it means that it will be able to do real targeted activity that will benefit residents and visitors to all of our areas. The other activity that we can do, which Claire has already sort of alluded to, is because we know there's a second round of this funding, so this future years, we can look at carrying out feasibility studies for potential larger capital projects, so we can develop a chain of shovel-ready projects so that we're ready for the next round and we can start delivering ambition through future funding. So project ideas for this element are being considered through the existing town centre groups, and will feed into those action plans. So stakeholders, town councils and businesses that are already involved in this work don't need to feed these ideas through the project ideas system, because we're on it and we're on top of it, and they should continue to engage through the routes that we're already establishing in town centres. And again, people who want to get involved in that type of activity should engage with officers at a local level, if that makes sense. Okay, I think that about covers it.
Do you want to pick up on this side then, or
handing back to you, Claire?
That's all right, I'll pick it up. Sorry, no problem. So I'm going to talk about the next two themes. So the first one of those is supporting local business. So obviously this intervention is very much about wanting to support local businesses to thrive, to innovate and grow. In terms of the number of interventions, so the number of sort of high level strategic activities, there's actually the greatest amount of choice in this actual ambition. There's actually 17 to choose from the government's predetermined menu of drop-down choices. But these include things like support for improvements to local retail, to hospitality and to leisure sector, promoting networking and collaboration, adopting energy efficient and low carbon technologies. Some of those 17 interventions we've just listed on the slide there just as bullet points, but obviously they are just only some of them, they are not all of them. So we'll need to look at them. Again, it's very similar principle to what I talked about earlier in Multiply. We do not have to choose all of the 17 interventions. What we will be looking to choose are those that are most relevant to the need that we have locally and where we want to move forward from. So obviously things like business support measures to drive employment growth. There'll be definitely continuation of the work that happens through our local business growth hub, the availability of the business support advisors who are there to sort of help local businesses from startup you know, through to growth, and then also onwards looking at sort of investment opportunities and how they can grow and expand their businesses, you know, even both nationally and internationally. There's support in here for developing and promoting the visitor economy with the local business population. Helena's already touched on markets, and again, there's support in this area for looking at development of markets and town centre retail and service sector infrastructure. You know, there's potentially funding for new improvements to training hubs, business support offers, incubator space. We've obviously had, or have just very recently opened 2 new business office locations in Goole and in Beverley. So there's still the potential, if we wanted to do more of those, that there could be some funding support in there. The support for growing the local social economy, export grants, and some of the issues that, in speaking to our local business support team, that they've identified already, and obviously this is by no means everything, but some of the key things that they've already fed into the conversations that we're starting to have in terms of issues that and key needs that have been identified by the businesses they're speaking to at the moment. A key one is around recruitment, and that's not so much about how a business recruits an individual, but it is more about the importance of being able to get across to potential employees, but also existing employees, the benefits and the opportunities that that business can offer its staff. And that's particularly important, and how they can retain existing employees, because there's quite a bit of evidence of where new businesses are moving into the area, which is obviously really good news, where staff will move from one business to another. But then sometimes some of those staff are wanting to then come back again because they've sort of belatedly realised actually how much they enjoyed working for the original business, but it's not something that the businesses are necessarily really good at being able to put across to their staff at the moment, to be able to sell them all the advantages of what it is to work for that firm. I think something that's exceedingly topical at the moment, but also is something that we can look to develop some support measures through this programme, is very much around green energy. So obviously with the ongoing rising costs of energy, businesses are constantly looking, just like we are at home, of how we can reduce costs. So something that we may well be very keen on looking at is how we can work with businesses and how we can help them to adopt more energy efficient measures to sort of like help them, you know, save some funds in that way. And also the important linkages that has to supply chains, and again in terms of sort of green energy, you know, the importance of having some of those supply chains a lot closer to home, given the rising cost of fuel. And then thirdly, I think one of the key things that's been coming out of conversations is again linked to sort of renewable energy, again, supply chains, but also they're important businesses to be able to spread the message and work with partners to promote what they do to promote the area on an international level. Sort of in June, there is an inward investment trade mission that's actually coming to the East Riding. It's being co-hosted by the Department for Innovation and Trade and Aura and the council over at our at the Humber Bridgehead site. And there's delegations from the America, Lithuania, France, Poland, Brazil, Norway and Ireland, amongst others, that are coming to the Humber. And so the ability to be able to host and also to send local businesses on trade missions to other countries, to be able to promote what we are able to offer in the area is really important in terms of helping our local businesses grow. And that's something, again, that we're also keen to explore further. This slide is just an example of showing you the type of information that we're going to need to put into the investment plan. So again, here we've got just picked at random 3 of the interventions that potentially we could look to support through the investment plan. What we'll need to do, because again, the investment plan will be written at quite a high strategic level, so give some type of examples of the projects that we might want to support in actually developing those interventions, and then again the type of outputs and the type of outcomes that we are going to be able to deliver through this programme to be able to report back to government, so that then obviously collectively they're going to be able to report on a much wider scale about what the UK Shared Prosperity Fund has delivered in terms of the amount of money that's been put into it. So I am now just going to move on to the people and skills third element. As Claire has already mentioned sort of in her introduction, the key thing to note about this is that for England, funding for this objective is only available from 24 to 25 onwards. It's a slightly different scenario in the other areas of the UK. And that's because we have the Multiply programme, and also because we have existing employment and skills provision support that is provided through the ESIF programmes, the European Structural Investment Funds programmes, most of which are carrying on delivery until around June 2023. The one proviso that government has written into this, as Claire's mentioned, if that we have some VCS organisations which are currently delivering those funds, and what they are delivering, and therefore obviously what the residents are benefiting from in terms of what they're gaining from that, is at risk because the funding ends in June 23, and if you apply the rule hard and fast, we wouldn't be able to pick up delivery of that until April 24. We are able to make a case as to why provision by the voluntary and community sector we could pick that up from, for example, July 23 onwards, and fund the gap until the main funding for the people and skills element is available from 2024. So that's particularly going to be important for our voluntary and community sector organisations. And when they come to fill in the project ideas form, there will be a question in there that is only relevant to them, and it just asks for some details on any ESIF programmes that they are currently delivering, and when that funding stops, so that we are well aware of what that is and what we then might need to put those details into the investment plan, so that where we want to continue that delivery, we would be able to, pick that up earlier than March 24. The people and skills element is sort of split into two parts, for want of a better phrase. It's aimed at employment support for economically inactive people, so that those are either benefits or non-benefits claimants, and then also skills provision. So that's about providing people with the skills that they need to progress in life and work. So it could be about not having the skills currently or wanting to improve the level of skills that you currently have. There's actually only 9 predefined interventions in this theme. I think that's probably mainly reflective of the fact that there is the multiply programme, which is obviously focused on numeracy itself, but also because at this moment in time we're only looking at delivery across 1 year. Again, a similar table, just for example, showing again the type of information we're going to need to put in the in the investment plan, the type of outputs again that we'll need to be able to evidence that we've delivered, and the outcomes that have been achieved through that. Particularly in terms of employment support for economically inactive people, there is very much a strong focus on being able to provide personalised and intensive support delivered through key workers and a one-to-one approach in that. Looking at alternative venues and ways in which we might be able to deliver basic skills training, and also very much, again, an awareness of some of the support that's needed could be counselling and advice that's very much focused around mental health support, as a way into getting people then onto more skills focused activity. So I think I'm able to pick up the next slide. When she's unmuted herself.
Sorry, I was paying too much attention to the questions that are coming in on the chat, which I promised myself I wouldn't do. So kind of there's some interesting discussion going on in the chat, which is recognising the key assumption that the government has made, that there's plenty of skills delivery going on through European Social Fund until the end of 2023 is actually completely incorrect, because lots of things finish earlier, and that even if you start in 24-25, if you finish in December 23, there's still a gap. So we're sorry about that, but that's the rules we've been given at the moment. We can seek to challenge them potentially a bit in the investment plan, but that is fairly clear in the rules that's when that skills funding kicks in. So in terms of the investment plan, we need to set out the local context, and obviously we've got people who can do that, and are on with doing it now, against the 3 investment priorities. We need to identify the interventions we wish to prioritise. Now, the slides with the kind of green matrices in the last 3 sections are kind of an initial indication of where we think our prioritisation might happen, in terms of what we know now needs to deliver, but that is not to say that we will exclusively only deliver against those interventions, and we are fully open for people to come with a case in the project ideas process to say why they wish to deliver under a completely different intervention that we haven't particularly targeted there, or actually why they want to target something that isn't one of those interventions but fits with the context. And if we can make kind of a good case, we can potentially add those in, as Suzanne said earlier. But we need to be very clearly linked to the local opportunities and challenges that we identify, as to why we're going to deliver the things that we do, and I'll come to that in a minute. We then need to talk about delivery, so in terms of how we're going to deliver and how we're going to organise, and we'll come to that as well. We need to set out the spend profile and what that's going to deliver in terms of outputs and outcomes, and we need to demonstrate that we've got the resource and capability to deliver this. And I think our kind of regional delivery performance in European social investment funds stands us in this local area in very good stead. Next slide. It's not moving on. There we go. So we're just Apologies, this will appear very small if you're looking at it on a small screen. You will be able to look at it later when we circulate the slide pack. I'm just going to nip through some of the key issues that we know we'll be kind of highlighting and trying to look at how we tackle through the investment plan. So the first thing, we're talking about population of nearly 350,000 people. Our key issue in terms of demography is that we have a population that is aging more rapidly than average, which is reducing our working age population, who are therefore available to do the jobs that need to be done, and also increasing demand in terms of services where it is already difficult to get sufficient workforce, such as health and social care. So we will certainly have kind of activities around that. The next one, very topical, fuel poverty. We already have a higher level of people in fuel poverty than average. That level is obviously increasing, and the average household paying 693 more per year was the last fuel energy cap rise, and the level of the next one was announced yesterday. So that gets worse. So we really need to sort of look at kind of activities that can address that, either through increasing people's level of income or reducing their costs. Connectivity, reasonably good level of superfast broadband, just under the national average. We've got a greater percentage of households with ultra fast availability. That's mainly because of the KC area and their kind of fibre to the home programme. But as you get out into the rural areas, very different picture in terms of who has access to ultra fast broadband. So clearly still an issue there. And as people have picked up in the chat, issues of digital inclusion, not just in terms of availability of connectivity, but also in terms of people's ability to access and have the digital skills that they need. So we'll certainly be looking at activities around that. In terms of employment, we have more than the average of people working in manufacturing. That's quite typical of the sort of the north of England. We have less than the average number of people working in human health and social work, so health and social care. I think that's probably because of the level of vacancies, rather than because we don't need all that many people. So real issue there in terms of actually kind of filling skills gaps, both health, social care, construction, and other areas that we'll need to address. You have the next slide. In terms of enterprise, we have lots and lots of micro businesses, slightly higher than the region, about the national average. So that's tiny businesses with 0 to 9 employees. We have a lower enterprise birth rate than England and the region, but we have a higher survival rate. So, you know, possibly better to start up a slightly smaller number of businesses, but more of them survive, than to kind of just try and get lots of people starting businesses up, and then see those businesses fail. So we need to sort of carefully think about kind of how our business support offer kind of covers the lifespan of businesses, rather than just going full scale at a kind of startup scheme. In terms of unemployment, we have about 5,000 people currently claiming unemployment benefits. That's 2.6% of working age East Riding residents, but much higher in some areas. So coastal towns such as Bridlington and Withensea, 6% and 8.4% respectively. So we need to focus some of our activity kind of around employability in those areas where people are struggling the most. Obviously, we're in a situation at the moment where there are lots of job vacancies in lots of areas, so we need to sort of tackle why people who aren't in work can't get into those jobs. And in terms of skills, we've talked about a bit in terms of the multiply scheme. We've got a greater percentage qualified to level 2. There are fewer qualified to level 4 than in England, but still more than there were, but we don't have sufficient level 4 jobs for the number of people with level 4 qualifications. So there's another, you don't just want to focus on kind of getting people to qualification, you want to make sure the jobs are there to support them. So if we go to the next slide. So just a quick canter through things that can't be funded through Shared Prosperity Fund. Nothing terribly surprising, I don't think. You can't pay to lobby, entertain or petition or challenge Parliament, government or other political activity. You can't pay for activities for a political party or for an exclusively religious nature. That doesn't exclude religious organisations from benefiting. It just has to be that not for their exclusively religious activities. Reclaimable VAT, that's fairly standard. You can't have payments for gifts or donations. You can't pay your criminal fines or penalties with Shared Prosperity Fund. You can't pay for anything where there is a statutory duty to deliver it or that is already fully funded. Can't pay for contingencies, so you have to be a bit careful in terms of how you cost up projects. You can't pay dividends to shareholders, you can't pay for bad debts, you can't pay your court costs or compensation costs, and you can't pay costs incurred in setting up and contributing to private pension schemes. So those are all pretty standard stuff that kind of public funding can't be used for. So no surprises, I don't think. So summary of the key points. We've got flexibility to invest across a range of activities. We need to look at that balance of priorities to reflect our local need. And that needs to be evidence-based, and that's why we're going to be asking you for project ideas, because we want the evidence from you that your projects are needed so that we can include them, or at least include the opportunity to deliver them within the investment plan. We need local partnership support. This is the start of that process today. We'll talk a bit more about it in a minute. There is the opportunity for bespoke interventions if someone's got the idea for something outside of the norm, but we'll have to have a very strong rationale to support it. Predominantly revenue funding with some capital allocation. I can see that this has been a bit of a source of discussion in the chat. Fundamentally, this programme is replacing mainly the revenue elements of European Structural Investment Funds. So European Social Fund has always been a revenue-only scheme, and that isn't changing in terms of the people and skills element of this programme. The funding for place and business is predominantly replacing the kind of business support elements, the innovation support elements, the place-based revenue activity that was within European Regional Development Fund, rather than the capital. The capital does start to go up a little bit as the programme delivers, and we don't know whether in years 4 to 6 that we will have a larger capital allocation because it will be a larger amount of money. That's not clear. There are other potential opportunities for capital projects. Obviously, the Levelling Up Fund is currently open now, and there will be large scale, mainly transport capital programme projects submitted under that Levelling Up programme. The overall value of the Levelling Up Fund is very small compared to the Shared Prosperity Fund. So we're not expecting to get enormous amounts out of that. But there is at least something there. Obviously, the main potential for capital funding is probably through devolution if it goes the way that we want If it doesn't, there is a real capital gap because there isn't anything currently that replaces things like the local growth fund that have been administered by the LEP up till now. And it's not clear where that will come from. So there is a potential gap there. Match funding is not required to unlock the funding allocation, so that's good in terms of the fact that really good projects that haven't got any other sources of funding can potentially be fully funded. That is not to say that we won't be asking within applications for people to demonstrate that they do have other money to invest into projects, or that will come in as a result of projects. So it won't be an absolute requirement, but certainly with just £12 million, we would be limited. So we would hope that people would be pulling in other funding to match against that. We can't shift underspends from year to year. So if we don't deliver our £1.2 million of shared prosperity fund this year, we can't move it into the year after. So when people come forward with kind of delivery timescales and financial profiles, they have to be realistic, they have to be deliverable, and we have to be able to keep stuff within year. So that's something to be really careful with in terms of proposals that are then made. And as I said before, funding post March 25 will come in the autumn 24. So we'll see what happens then. Next slide. So the next steps. So this is for shared prosperity funds. So remember, if you want to do a project ideas form for Multiply, we want that by the 9th of June. For shared prosperity, we're giving you till the 16th because we've got a little bit longer for the investment plan. Between June and July, we'll be reviewing things that have come in, and we'll be having a number of thematic subgroup discussions to develop the plan. We haven't exactly tied down what they're going to be. We know that there will definitely be some thematic discussions around digital inclusion. Our digital team is already on board to help to make that happen. There will be certainly some kind of coastal discussion, kind of on a geographical basis, about what we need to do to tackle some of those coastal inequalities. There will be some other discussions, probably one around kind of business support and innovation. We'll decide, we'll see what comes through in terms of the project ideas forms as well, in terms of where we need to gather other groups together to do that. We're aiming to have a shadow local partnership board in place. So the local partnership board is the board that will make the kind of decisions around the strategy and the funding decisions. We are in discussions with Hull as to whether we have a single overarching kind of economic prosperity board that looks after both programs, because obviously we're working towards joint devolution deal. We expect that if a combined authority exists by 2025, that the next 3 years will sit with them in terms of the investment planning. So there's some sense to that. And also in terms of kind of main, some of the participants, so people like kind of HE and FE and the Environment Agency and the Police and Crime Commissioner and other people who are likely to be on that board, they'd potentially have to be on both if we had to, and that becomes difficult to sort of manage. So we will have a look at that. There will be a specific East Riding group just to look at kind of funding allocations, whatever happens. So we'll develop that as it goes. 1st of August, we've got to get the plan in. They're looking at them. We can submit early if we like. So they say they'll start looking at them in July, but I don't think they'll get many in July. And then they're planning to sign them off between October and November. February to March, we've got to do our kind of annual report and update our investment plan moving forwards. We will probably, we will deliver in a number of ways. I think it comes on to the next slide. I might say it in a minute. Yes. So how people can access, there are 3 ways. They say there's 4 ways. So there are 4 ways that this fund can be delivered. So we can have competitions for grant funding. So we will open application processes, people can apply with a project, and they will go through an appraisal process and be approved. We can procure and commission, so we can decide we need a very specific piece of work and we want to procure it in from organisations, and we will run through that process, and we can deliver some activity through in-house teams. So some of the work that Helena was describing in terms of the work that the local growth team do in terms of placemaking, we might deliver some of the work around business support where we've already got kind of teams in place delivering that activity. Some of that will be kind of directly delivered through the council. So yes, so what we will do, can you just go back a minute? What I wanted to say, in terms of competitions for grant funding, we will obviously have to decide how they are. We will have as few programs as we can. I'm not saying there'll be only one, but what we don't want is the money kind of diluted into lots of tiny pots that are very specific, and then a project spans across more than one, and then it becomes difficult to fund. So we will try and be as sensible as we can in terms of how we structure grant funding. We will try and open kind of the application process once we've decided what it looks like as early as we can, so that we can be going through the kind of appraisal and selection processes before our investment plans are necessarily approved by government. So because otherwise the chance of spending the 1.2 million that we have to spend this year becomes increasingly diminished because we haven't got enough time left. So we'll work out kind of what that timeline looks like as we get more detail, but expect kind of in late summer, early autumn, I would think we will kind of open formal competitions for funding. Okay, next slide. So the local partnership, I've mentioned a little bit. It's a core component. We have to demonstrate that we have it. There are some specific local stakeholders listed in the government requirements, so voluntary community sector, employer bodies and businesses, local MPs. We will obviously want our local elected members to be involved in that as well. They're just not listed in the government requirements. And we will convene kind of the local partnership board and any subgroups. And there's a list of kind of potential representatives that, if you manage to follow all of them, would be enormous. So we will have kind of a wider partnership group, which this is kind of the start of, really. This kind of, you know, we've got 150 people on the call at the moment. That's almost our wider partnership sat right there, plus the people who can't come and are going to watch later. And we will keep people who are interested up to date and involved in what's happening. We will then have a sort of smaller kind of group that will become the board and the decision-making panel. So if anyone's been involved in kind of leader programs and the like before, that kind of structure moving forward. If you're interested in being part of that local partnership board in particular, please do email us and let us know. We've already had a message from the Police and Crime Commissioner this morning saying that he's very interested in somebody representing the PCC on there, so that's really good. So yes, so that's that. What have we got left? Further guidance. So if you just hop onto the next slide. So we have put some links here to where you can find them further guidance. So the prospectus for both funds, Multiply and the Shared Prosperity Fund, a really useful document in terms of the Shared Prosperity Fund is the interventions, outputs and indicators guidance, because you can really start to see what you might be expected to deliver for your money if you're putting projects through to us. And then we will put further updates on what's happening on Multiply and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund into our section of the corporate website. So that list is there. There's also kind of existing adult learning and employment support, which you can access. The link is there. And a very new website went live last week, the Invest East Riding site. So businesses who are looking for support now can go to there and find out what's happening already. So there is existing support that is already being delivered. There are grant funds for growing businesses available at the moment, both through the council and through the local enterprise partnership. So people who kind of want to grow now, who want to access support now, don't stop and sit and wait just for this to happen. Access stuff, a lot of it is kind of the last trail of European funding. We want to spend every penny of that if we possibly can. So really encourage people. We've had an email this week from the people who are kind of running export support now. They have money that is underspent. So there's export support now. You don't have to wait for the programme. There's business support, there's growth grants. So do that now. There's also other grants available in terms of community activity. So the Do It for East Yorkshire Community Fund was open last year very successfully. It's not open at the moment, but it will be very shortly for this year. So if you're looking at kind of small scale community activity where a grant of about £5,000 would help, look out for that in the next couple of weeks. We want activity to carry on now. We're very aware of the big potential hole in skills delivery. We will look if there's any way of addressing that through what's available, but it is very difficult. So that with, I'm 6 minutes early, that's very unusual. So we do have time now for some questions. I haven't been watching the chat while I've been talking, so I don't know. Pauline's just saying Spark Fund still has some funds available for innovation in the East, for businesses in the East Riding, and support for internships. So the stuff there. Oh, Catherine, grants still available for SMEs through the supply chain network. So just, you know, the urge, don't sit and wait. If you think you're waiting for this to come, there might be something that can happen already. Just having a look through the questions. Is there any indication of costs per person employed? If you look at the outputs and indicators document, there's no specific prices. They haven't set any. I shouldn't think that we will, but you can kind of work it out in terms of, you know, how much money we've got and what they're expecting to happen in terms of about where you are. There we go. Is there a minimum maximum funding level for projects? We don't know yet. There will definitely be a minimum because it costs as much to administer a £500 grant as it does to administer a much larger one, and we need to make sure that we can have a sufficient administration. Technical dull questions, and we do like a technical dull question. Is there equivalent FRIC provision for overheads? We don't know yet. There's nothing specific in the regulations. It would be nice to think that we could. So we'll have to think about that. Because yes, you absolutely don't want to be trying to evidence everything. So in terms of skills, is there scope for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund to help young people get to their place of work? There already is a Kickstart scooter scheme in the East Riding. We will be looking to support it potentially through UK Shared Prosperity and make sure that they've got sufficient scooters to lend, but it operates now. There are mopeds available now. So please do. Having a squeeze up. Is there joint planning with Hull? Yes. So certainly where we know kind of delivery at the moment. So business support is a really good example. that currently the growth hub for the LEP delivers across Hull and the East Riding. We don't want to kind of go miles away from that. So we will try and have some kind of alignment, I think is the best word, within the investment plans, so that it's clear that we've kind of got a common approach. And we're certainly looking at kind of places where there's kind of maybe gaps in one area or another. So Hull have a much more wide-ranging energy efficiency support program for businesses than we do at the moment. We've got a tiny one and it's tied up in another capital project that isn't moving very fast, and stuff. So where there's gaps that are missing, we'll try and fill them in. Going forward, we will certainly look in terms of things like Multiply, where we're looking at potentially kind of commissioning somebody to deliver some of the kind of voluntary sector reach. That we will have a similar approach to that in Hull and the East Riding. We will probably have to commission 2 separate projects because we've got to manage our money separately. The minute we try and pool money, we have to write another investment plan for Hull and the East Riding, as well as one for Hull and one for the East Riding. And in the time that's available, we just don't think we can do it. So what we're looking at is that ability to kind of align things going forwards.
Excuse me, there's a few new questions that have come in.
Yes, I was just scrolling down. Will impacts be measured only according to economic value? No. So we are very proud in the East Riding that we have the social value engine, and we have the ability and the knowledge to build in social outcomes into our programs as well as economic ones, and there'll be some environmental elements to that as well. So we will absolutely be looking for added social and economic and environmental value to projects, and that might well kind of impact on the kind of level of funding. I said there's no definite requirement for match, but certainly if it was a project that delivered significant social and environmental benefits as well as economic ones, we'd maybe be interested in funding it to a higher level. So Jill needs to maximise the skills bootcamp funding, absolutely. Net zero collection across these. So hydrogen, carbon capture, yes, I'm sure there is. I don't know how yet, because it depends on the project. Concern about gap for skills development, absolutely. I think what we'll need to do is kind of pull a group together of people who are kind of currently or have been delivering ESF funded kind of sector skills for the workforce type activity, and people who are still delivering ESF activity now, and people who might want to, and just let's identify kind of exactly where the cliff edges sit, what the gap is, whether there's anything we can do through the kind of business support element to kind of put some stuff in that doesn't say it's skills, but maybe kind of is, to fit with, you know, we need to explore the art of the possible, Michelle, I think is what I'm saying, in terms of those skills. So that's what we will try and do. Pip says the flood Innovation Centre can still support businesses and community organisations with their flood resilience. So brilliant. New message coming at the bottom. Oh, count me at all. We're getting the membership of the skills group happening as we speak. This is marvellous. So Annabelle, Suzanne, Helena, is there anything I have missed in this list of questions that you think it'd be useful to cover? Is there anything that you want to add in terms of any of the points that have been made?
No, I think the only thing we were going to say was we'll go through the questions and just come up with a frequently go and dig deeper for the answers, and we'll circulate those frequently asked questions at probably not at the same time as the slides, because the slides are already written, the frequently asked questions aren't, but we'll work on it.
Super.
Yeah, and I was going to just say that if there's anything that we don't have the answer to yet, we do have dedicated email contacts with the relevant government departments that we can throw that question in their direction and see what response they're able to provide us to. We have flagged up a couple of things already, and we've had pretty quick turnaround in terms of their responses. So if it's something that we just don't know about yet, we can't find, you know, in the guidance in terms of a query that you've asked, then we will feed that upwards and obviously feed those responses out. It could be that those responses come a little bit after the frequently asked questions, given that there might be a bit of a time lag, but we'll endeavour to get those out as soon as we possibly can.
Yes. And certainly if it's things where we haven't decided yet, we'll try and be clear about that. So there was some question in the discussion kind of about larger businesses and subsidy control and stuff. And I don't think we've not got down to that level of detail yet to know how we might approach those things. There was a question about whether business support funding could support farm businesses, to which the answer is probably, as long as it's not kind of direct agricultural production. But we think there are rumours that DEFRA is going to launch a specific rural programme that will start from 2023. We don't know what it looks like yet, and what it will do and how big it is. And what we're thinking in terms of that is that if there are kind of project ideas that need some kind of feasibility or development in rural areas, we'll absolutely fund those in year one. We'll have a kind of feasibility kind of strand to our grant programme. But if then in next year it becomes obvious that it would be better that we funded those through some kind of rural programme, then we'll direct them in that direction at that point. So we'll aim to be as flexible as possible. So that's really good. I was just going to say a little bit more about the project ideas form, because we haven't said a great deal. So fundamentally, the project ideas form is just a relatively short form. There are three really key questions, which basically says what it is that you think that you want to do or you think needs to be done, why you know that there's a need for that, and how it fits with this programme. And then there is the ability to kind of identify which of the interventions that would deliver against. So it just gives us a kind of an idea of what's out there in terms of what people want to deliver. If I could make a plea that even if you think we know about it already, can you still fill a project ideas form in? That would be really helpful, just so that we don't forget something that we already know about. We'd rather have too many project ideas forms than not enough, I think, in terms of trying to make decisions going forward. And it will also allow us to kind of identify kind of where the programme and where the interventions don't quite deliver what's needed. I'm not sure. There's been a bit of a conversation about kind of innovation in the chat. It's not quite clear that we can replicate what's happened in terms of innovation in the European Structural Investment Funds through shared prosperity, and we need to sort of think carefully about that. That's probably another group. There's people now interested in improving high streets, communities and places. We will definitely put your ideas in, and we will connect people together. Oh yes, we want the innovation group. That's the university being very excited. So here we go. Where we be sent a project. So project ideas form. When you get these slides, in the next steps slides, there is a link to the project ideas form. I think Suzanne
we'll also put the link in the body of the email.
We'll put the link in the body of the email. It takes you into our funding application system, FlexiGrant. This is not an application for funding. It's just the easiest way of managing all those ideas coming in together. So I just want to be clear, you're not applying for funding at this point. You're giving us ideas for what you want included within the remit of the investment plan, so that later we can either commission out that activity or we can open grant programs. We'll do both, depending on what it is and how it will best work. So that's what's going to happen next. Is there any burning questions from anybody who hasn't been able to access the chat? Can't see see any hands going up. That's good. Doesn't seem to be anyone typing at the moment. So I think we're just about done. So thank you ever so much, all of you, for taking the time. Thank you if you're watching this later, for watching it later. If people do have questions that they go off the call and they think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, again, in the email that goes out, there will be details of how to email in kind of further questions for us. But please get cracking on your project ideas form, get them into us, and let's have the best kind of engagement in developing this investment plan in the ridiculously short time we've been given that we possibly can. And we'll try and make an investment plan that works for everyone. We can obviously then carry on the conversation because we have the opportunity to update the investment plan for year 2 and 3 kind of in February, March next year. So if we don't quite get everything in the first time round, we will definitely carry on the conversations. So on that note, thanks to you all, thanks to all the speakers. Thank you to Suzanne for doing the slides, because that's always the worst job. And we will be in touch, and we'll just leave the chat open for just a few minutes till about 11:30, because there's lots of people who are kind of saying we'd be interested in this group, we'd be interested in that. So we'll just, until everybody's gone, we'll leave the chat open so that you can add things in, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Thank you.